What's up, guys, and welcome back to another lesson in my No Mod Shop class here on the Skooled Zone. Got some great feedback on the last video, the top 5 must-know settlement building tips, and I was really happy to hear that a lot of you didn't know about some of the things I covered. That's awesome. I mean, not that you didn't know about this stuff, but that the video could help you out. By the end of this mini-series, I'm hoping to change the entire landscape on settlement building in Fallout 4. You know, no pun intended. So keep spreading the word about these videos. I'd really appreciate it. So I realized when I first started recording this video that I'm pretty much going to be talking the whole time about the topic, and there's not much to show. It's more of like a theory video about a very specific game mechanic. So instead of just standing there with my character staring at the screen, or doing some random gameplay, I thought it'd be kind of entertaining to build some funny and quirky things in the background while I go into detail about the settlement size glitch. There's this desperado at my Abernathy settlement here that keeps stealing my legendary weapons out of the workshop. He even managed to find him in a floor safe that I have hidden in the house. So I think he deserves a little slap on the wrist. But don't worry, I'm not going to give him the typical wasteland justice. He's lucky he's not in Diamond City and stole like a pack of gum and the whole town would have blown his head off. Instead, we're just going to have a little fun with him and hopefully by the end he'll have learned his lesson. Okay, enough of that and on to the settlement size glitch. So in the last video, I briefly explained what the settlement size glitch is and showed you guys the actual tutorial on how to use it. So if you haven't seen that last video, pause this first and check that out. Each of my lessons in the No Mod Shop class will be building on the previous lessons. In this video, I'm going to explain how it works, why it works, add some miscellaneous theories about it, ways to make it more efficient, and then give you some important cautionary tales. Make sure you stick around to the end of the video for the cautionary tales though. Skipping those is going to be like skipping the list of side effects on a prescription drug, you know what I mean? You want to be armed with all the information before you start using such a powerful tool in the settlement building process. As you may have heard me whine about, this mechanic can break your game. Don't want anybody coming back and telling me they followed my advice and their game now won't even load. So I just want to issue a fair warning about that. So let's talk a little bit about exactly what's going on with the settlement size limit and why it exists. From what I've heard about the development process in Fallout 4, the settlement building aspect of the game wasn't originally supposed to be included. It was something they added later in the development process to kind of take something already awesome over the top. You know what I mean? The game is already massive enough, so settlement building is like the whipped cream and cherry on top. Once they realized, though, that they were onto something special, certain aspects of the settlement building got integrated into the storyline and even the lore of the game. But we do have to remember that the whole settlement building mechanic was never supposed to dominate the processing engine of the game. Things would be a lot different with settlement building if the game was entirely devoted to that. If it was just a game about post-apocalyptic building or something. Since it's not, there are a lot of dynamics about settlement building that never went through the full refinement process during development. Having said that, though, it's still one of the most revolutionary game mechanics that's come out in a while. I've mentioned that before, so I have to give Bethesda props for even going as far as they did with it. Think about it, gamers would have been just as happy with Fallout if this aspect of the game was never included. Having said all that, one of the challenges the developers faced was how to keep the game from slowing down or even freezing when unknowns are being added and written into the file system of a controlled pre-existing world within the game. Their best solution, I guess, was to create an early warning system in the settlement building mechanic to prevent those problems. I mean, they didn't want fans coming back and complaining about this aspect of the game crashing their platforms. That would have been like a PR nightmare. So they created the settlement size limit to prevent that very issue from happening. What the settlement size limit attempts to calculate, in the coding behind the scenes and all, is the most your hardware can safely render according to the platform data it detects to ensure technical stability so that you have a smooth and crash-free experience. If you stay under the size limit, you shouldn't have any frame rate lag, there shouldn't be any delays in opening your workshop, etc. The problem is that the pre-imposed size limit is such a debilitating factor if you want to build anything worthwhile in your settlement. I'm sure you've noticed this yourself. Depending on your platform, of course, and how much memory is available, you start off with the meter at like the halfway point, then you throw down a few walls and a few beds and you're already into the yellow. But as all game companies can attest, players will always find things that were missed in a game's beta testing process. It's just inevitable. It's the power of collective outsourcing. I mean, that's why game companies issue patches. And it wasn't long after the game was released that players started noticing that when they stored items they dropped out of their inventory directly back into the workshop, that the size limit meter started going down. The community immediately called it a glitch, but it was one of those rare beneficial glitches. So they pleaded with Bethesda not to patch it so they could build to their heart's content. I wish I knew if there was a discussion at Bethesda on whether to patch it or not. That would have been an interesting discussion to listen in on as a fly on the wall, Same with the rug glitch. But for better or worse, they left it alone, and the community was pleased. Whether intentional or not, this glitch has allowed creative players to build some of the coolest architectural creations in any video game except maybe Minecraft. Although many would argue that more can be done in the Fallout 4 building system than you could ever do in Minecraft. Bethesda probably felt that since they had installed the settlement size limit, they were protected from criticism, because if people wanted to bypass the size limit, they could do it at their own risk. Really, when it comes down to it though, the settlement size limit is a lot like the expiration date on prescription drugs. Pharmaceutical companies will put an expiration date on drugs that is usually way within the safe zone to cover their butts, when drugs usually don't become unsafe for quite a while after the expiration date. Good friend of the channel and fellow YouTuber Nick Nimmin did a great video on whether drugs really expire. Links to that video below if you want to learn more about that, because it's an excellent analogy to this settlement size glitch. In fact, I did a collab with Nick in my first Fallout 4 video. Longtime viewers may remember that. Cool guy. He runs a YouTube tips channel now if you want to check out his new stuff. So before I talk about how safe or unsafe it is to use the settlement size glitch, let's talk a little bit about why it works. As I showed you guys in the last video, one of the first things you could do to reduce your accumulated size meter is to store or scrap things you've already built. They obviously included this mechanic so you didn't just build things and then change your mind and not have it reduce the meter. That would have been incredibly frustrating, as you'd only have one chance to get everything right the first time. So you build things and it increases the meter, and you scrap and store the things you've built and it reduces the meter. Perfect. But what happens to items you've introduced from the outside world into your settlement boundaries? Those are still tangible objects that have been created and rendered within the game world. They couldn't exactly be invisible to the game engine once they enter your settlement. I mean, decorating your settlement is half the fun, right? But since those items have to be graphically rendered, they add to the burden that's put on the CPU. Therefore, there had to be a way to calculate the equal relief to the engine when those polygons were put away or taken out of the equation of the environment. Since Bethesda took the extraneous objects a step further and made them comprised of components that you could scrap to build other items, all those objects both contribute to and eliminate from the graphical rendering needs of the engine. Trust me here, I'm trying to make this as simple as possible without going too heavy into programmer speak. In fact, if there are any hardcore programmers watching, I'd love to hear your friendly take on the game mechanics involved here. The point of all this, though, is to say that when you scrap or store items into your workshop, it's not a glitch. The game mechanic is technically doing what it's supposed to be doing. The only thing that Bethesda might have overlooked was a way to categorize items being brought into the settlement boundaries as not having originated from within the workshop itself. However, that would have been a programming nightmare, and remember earlier when I said that this was a bonus element they added to the game a little later in the process. So either they overlooked this governing step, or they knew about it and just decided that they had more important things to take care of before release. Nevertheless, it's become a colloquial term in the Fallout 4 community to call this mechanic we're talking about here the settlement size glitch. But hopefully I've shed some light on why it's not really a glitch per se. If there was a more appropriate name for it, it might be something like the capacity limiter bypass exploit. But that'll never catch on since that's a mouthful, and it's just easier to say the settlement size glitch. Plus, I don't know, sometimes I think there's a certain schadenfreude in the gamer community when they think they've pulled one over on the gaming companies, you know? It's like, hey, they want to limit my settlement size? I don't think so. I'll show them. Anyway, you guys are free to disagree with my theory down below, because in the end, it's just a theory. It's not like I spoke directly with the developers or anything, as cool as that would be. But hey, that's what the After School Club is for, you know, to generate some fun and friendly discussions about various things in the video. So if you have another theory, feel free to add your 2 cents below. Okay, now on to some ways that you can maximize your use of the settlement size glitch, and then on to some cautionary tales. So a lot of Fallout 4 players, and many Fallout 4 YouTubers as well, seem to think that the settlement size glitch can only be done with weapons. That's actually not the case. This exploit can be done with virtually anything. Weapons just happen to be the most efficient at getting the job done. Here, I'll show you. We'll interrupt our regularly scheduled programming in the background here. Okay, so I've built these extra walls again around Abernathy Farm to get my size meter just to the brink of yellow again. To prove my point, I'm going to drop a bunch of aid items that I pulled out of storage. Jet, Psycho, water, mute fruit, etc., etc. Even some wine. Okay, now check this out. We'll see how many of each type it takes. We'll start with the jet. Now mentats. See, there you go, back to blue. Or, you know, green or whatever color you're using in your HUD. Now check this out. I'll reload and even do it with the wine. Okay, we're back to yellow. Store the wine. Boom! That's all it took. Now we're back to blue. So this exploit works with pretty much anything. People have just found it's easier to drop and store weapons. Why is that? My guess is 2 reasons. For one, it's usually the first menu that pops up in their inventory. And 2, because weapons seem to have a greater effect at reducing the size meter. And therein lies the mystery. What is actually the contributing factor in reducing the size meter? Some people suggest it has to do with the amount of damage done. As you can see with the aid items, that's probably not correct. Others think it has to do with the size of the weapon. There are other theories too. Here's my theory, and again, it's just a theory. I think there's 2 factors involved here: weight and the amount of the components the item contains. For example, why did it take 29 jet and, 50-something mentats to do the same as only 13 bottles of wine? Well, as you can see, the jet and mentats, weigh 0.1 pounds each, a tenth of a pound, whereas the wine bottles weigh 1 pound each. But I don't think it's just weight. Some weapons weigh less than others, yet have a profound effect at reducing the accumulated size meter. For example, the weapon I've found that has the greatest effect on reducing the size meter is the gamma gun. Those radiation guns you get from the Children of Adam or whatever. It certainly doesn't weigh as much as the sledgehammer, but it contains more components. I don't know, what do you guys think? Let me know your theories down below. Also, if you found other weapons that are as good at or better than the gamma gun at reducing the accumulated size meter, let us know that as well. All useful information. And all this will be great stuff to discuss in the After School Club. Okay, now on to some cautionary tales. As I mentioned earlier, the settlement size limit is there for a reason. That reason is to prevent frame rate lag and system crashes as more and more polygons within the settlement boundaries need to be individually rendered. But also, like I explained earlier, the size limit is set lower by the developers than it needs to be out of an abundance of caution. So how far can you go, and what happens when you go too far? I'll start with the latter. So when you overuse this exploit too much, the first thing you'll notice are frames dropping. Things slow down as the engine rushes to try and buffer what's up ahead. As you stretch it a little further, you'll notice that it takes longer to go into your workshop mode from the time you push the button. Then it takes longer to switch to different categories in the workshop. Eventually, when you take it too far, the game will freeze from time to time. The further you take it, the more often your game will crash on you. And keep in mind, there are other things the engine has to render as well. All your settlers and their AI movements, as well as the environment. In fact, things got really bad for me during rad storms or even at night. We often take all these things for granted that are happening in the background of the game. It's kind of a marvel if you think about it. The worst, though, comes when you take it even further than that. That's when your saves will start to get corrupted, and sometimes your uncorrupted saves won't even load. I definitely took Vault 42 to the max. Partly because I just had to complete my vision, but also kind of as an experiment to see what happens in the terminal stages, so to speak. It's all good because now I know how far I can take it and what are the red flags you should look for to know when you're entering that danger zone. There's one more thing I should add just so you know. From the moment you first use the settlement size glitch, you're forever damaging your settlement. I don't know if damaging is the right word. Altering, I guess, is a better word. Here's what I mean. In a manner of speaking, you're basically overwriting some of the rules to your save files when it comes to that settlement, and that settlement will never quite be the same. Let me give you an example. Remember how I said I was having trouble recording the 2 tour videos because of all the game crashes? Fortunately, I got one of them done, and I'm working on a second one. I also mentioned that I got around the problem by breaking down parts of the base that weren't in view of the camera, so to speak. In one instance, before I recorded the Overseer's quarters, I deconstructed almost all the lower levels. The size meter literally went down to 0. If there was a way for it to go negative, it would have, because over time I'd altered the meter calculation so much. But even with like 75% of the base gone, I was still getting some residual frame rate problems and the occasional crash. It wasn't nearly as bad as before, but it made me realize that the settlement was permanently damaged in a way. And it stays that way unless you start over with a brand new character. I tried to think of another good analogy to explain this, and besides the expiration date on drugs, perhaps another good analogy might be the weight capacity on an elevator. Most common elevators display a sign that says like 2,000 pounds is the maximum weight limit, but in truth, most modern elevators are built to handle almost double that load. The problem is that once you pass the 2,000 pound limit, there are so many unknown factors that can contribute to the point at which the cable snaps. Because of that unpredictability, it's just better to play it way safe and have the elevator make a buzzing sound when it nears the max weight limit. Why take chances, So using the settlement size glitch is like disabling the elevator buzzer and then loading more and more stuff onto the elevator. It's going to handle it fine at first, but then things will get slower and slower as more strain is put on the equipment until eventually it crashes. Now, I'm not trying to scare you away from using this exploit. I'm just giving you my cautionary tales like I said I would. My suggestion is this: by all means, use this exploit if you're onto a hot idea and the size limit gets in your way. I can totally relate to how frustrating that cap can be when you hit it so soon. But just know ahead of time what you're getting into. As the old saying goes, all things in moderation. And by the way, if you use a mod or console commands to overcome the settlement size limit, it's doing the same thing. It's just saving you the trouble of having to go through the drop and store process. You'll still eventually run into the same problems if you abuse it, because that's just computational logic. You can't create memory or more processing power out of thin air. But all these are tools in your toolbox, and just like in the last video, not all tools are going to be the same. Some of the tools I'll show you are like screwdrivers, and other tools I'll show you are like power saws. You don't necessarily need gloves and goggles with a screwdriver, but you'd be a fool to use a power saw without the proper safety equipment, you know what I mean? Awesome. Alright guys, well in the next video we'll be taking a deep dive into the rug glitch. It's also a very powerful tool to use, but fortunately it's much safer to use, and it's really fun too. And interestingly enough, it's also not technically a glitch. All will be explained in the next video. Thanks so much for watching guys. Feel free to add your own theories down below. I think the collective wisdom of the Schooled Zone community is going to be super valuable in these no-mod shop classes. So keep it classy, fun, and informative, and I think we can all benefit from your wisdom too. Go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video around. That would be awesome, and we'll see you back here soon for the next building lesson. Class dismissed.